Kyrie Jesu Domine, dona eis requiem.
Good afternoon, everybody. I decided to make a video again today. As I said, it used to be a daily thing when I first started. Let's just look at Easter, one of the things that I find most amazing about the Easter season and the witness. As Catholics, we're doing a daily reading of Acts of the Apostles. We read it from the beginning to the end throughout the 50 days of the Easter season, the one exception being Holy Saturday. We did not hear from the Acts of the Apostles. But the rest of the Easter season, started on Easter Sunday, we are hearing from the Acts of the Apostles. And I think one of the things when you look at the New Testament that's rather amazing is that the apostles testify that when Jesus was alive, they really didn't grasp his message or his person at times. They're very self-critical. They do not make themselves look in a good light for being swift enough to catch up to what Jesus was saying, or at times, certainly no flattery about the passion. They all desert him except for John. And John's only mentioned in really 2 of the accounts. In the rest of the accounts, they all desert him. Peter denies him, Judas betrays him. So it's very frank talk about their human nature. But then you come to the Acts of the Apostles, and it's hard to believe it is these same men who just, 50-some days ago abandoned Jesus to his fate and are now professing that he is risen from the dead, he is ascended into glory, and he is going to come again. And until he comes again, they are going out to preach the good news that Jesus Christ is the Lord, that we will find salvation through his name, through our faith in him and our subsequent life of faith, of works that flow from that faith. And you see that throughout all of Acts of the Apostles and the testimony of Scripture. So I think that's pretty amazing, because you can look at some other scriptures at times, and the leaders aren't usually so critical of themselves, of their own failures, their own shortcomings. I've only looked at the Quran a little bit, but it's God blessing Muhammad all the time. I mean, that's how I believe devout Muslims would look at it. They see Muhammad as the perfect person, sort of like we see Jesus as a perfect person, although we also see him as the Son of God. But Muhammad being a prophet, really, our analogy would be, if he's a prophet, it would be on the same level as the apostles, and we don't proclaim any of the apostles to be perfect. They are all flawed. Probably the one who comes closest is John, who is faithful, who is willing to share the same fate with Christ. He's there at the foot of the cross, willing to risk himself being crucified. But other than that, all the rest of them acknowledge their shortcomings. And it's interesting about Paul, when you hear about his witness, Paul never steps over the fact that at one time he persecuted Christians. This is significant. Paul wants people to know that, that in his zealous as a very pious and holy Jew, he persecuted the church. But now, thanks be to God's grace, he's been called to be an apostle. Even though he considers himself the least of the apostles, he has the calling. And that's really something to reflect on during Easter, just looking at the source material itself, the scriptures, and what they mean and what they tell us about the apostles. It's really worth looking through Acts of the Apostles if you've never read it, because the first half of it really is the life of the church in Israel, primarily focusing on Peter and John as 2 apostles. Then we have a transition with some of the deacons. We hear about Stephen and his eventual martyrdom. We hear about Philip and kind of the dialogue that he has with the Ethiopian eunuch. And then we have Paul. And then there's a transition from the church in Jerusalem and in Judea to the church outside of it with Paul. And we get to follow Paul in his, apostolic ministry. And one of the things that Paul always does is always go to the synagogues because he knows Hebrew scripture inside and out, and he wants to proclaim how Jesus is the fulfillment of that, just like Jesus did on the road to Emmaus. That was today's scripture reading. He opened their minds to the scriptures. Of course, we're not talking about the New Testament because it doesn't exist at that time. We're talking about the Old Testament, where you can look and see how the Lord is foretold, how these are all various signs, especially Isaiah and the book of Psalms. There are all these touchstones that point to the person of Jesus Christ. Crickets, it's been fun. Bye-bye.